Ever notice how your smartwatch congratulates you for walking 3,000 steps right before reminding you to breathe? Somewhere along the way, we built a world where surviving the day apparently requires notifications. Meanwhile, archaeologists keep digging up ancient skeletons with remarkably strong bones, surprisingly healthy teeth, and bodies that look like they spent their lives training for an ultramarathon without ever hearing the word fitness. So were ancient humans actually healthier than we are? It sounds like one of those questions with an obvious answer. They didn't have hospitals, antibiotics, or painkillers. We have robotic surgery, MRI scanners, and a pharmacy on every street corner. Case closed. Except it is T, because when scientists began comparing ancient skeletons, modern hunter-gatherers, and our own increasingly sedentary lifestyles, they uncovered a strange contradiction. In many ways, our ancestors were physically stronger, leaner, and better adapted to daily movement than the average person today. Yet they also faced diseases, injuries, infections, and dangers that most of us will thankfully never experience. So which version of humanity was actually healthier? The answer turns out to be far more complicated than counting birthdays or comparing life expectancy. To understand it, we have to forget almost everything Hollywood has taught us about prehistoric life. Ancient humans weren't T-muscular superheroes living in perfect harmony with nature, but they also weren't T-miserable cavemen constantly one bad day away from extinction. The real story lies somewhere in between, and surprisingly, it begins long before hospitals. Long before agriculture, before cities, before humans had even figured out what a chair was. Which, if you think about it, may have been one of the healthiest decisions we ever accidentally made. Before ancient humans could be healthier, they first had to become human. And the human body was not designed in a laboratory with adjustable desks, climate control, and a mysterious bowl of office candy. It was assembled by evolution through millions of years of walking, climbing, carrying, digging, throwing, and occasionally sprinting because something nearby had decided we looked nutritious. Movement was not exercise. It was transportation, employment, grocery shopping, childcare, home maintenance, and emergency services combined. Our ancestors evolved as unusually efficient endurance travelers. Long legs, spring-like tendons, arched feet, heat-releasing sweat glands, and the ability to breathe independently of our stride helped humans cover large distances without overheating as quickly as many other mammals. We were not the fastest animals on the landscape. Not even close. A determined house cat could embarrass most of us. But humans became exceptionally good at continuing after faster animals became tired. That endurance mattered because food rarely arrived in a paper bag. Foragers had to search for plants, track animals, carry children, transport water, crack nuts, climb for honey, and drag useful materials back to camp. Even rest was usually performed on the ground, which meant repeatedly squatting, kneeling, standing, and shifting position. The ancestral version of a reclining office chair was a rock that hurt slightly less than the other rocks. This constant mechanical stress shaped the skeleton. Bone is living tissue. It responds to repeated loading by remodeling itself, strengthening areas that regularly experience pressure and strain. Archaeologists can therefore examine the geometry of ancient limb bones and estimate how physically demanding a person's life may have been. Many mobile populations developed robust lower limbs because walking was not a wellness goal. It was Tuesday. But activity was only one part of the biological foundation. Human appetites also evolved under uncertainty. Energy-dense foods such as fat, honey, ripe fruit, and starch were valuable precisely because they were not always available. A brain that encouraged us to consume extra calories when we found them was not malfunctioning. It was protecting us against the possibility that tomorrow's menu would be wind and disappointment. That same survival system operates inside us today. The difference is that ancient cravings now live in a world where concentrated sugar, fat, and salt are available 24 hours a day, often through a window without leaving the car. Evolution prepared us to resist famine. It did not prepare us for unlimited cheese fries. Even stress worked differently. Ancient humans certainly experienced fear, conflict, injury, hunger, and loss. But many threats were intense and temporary. The body released stress hormones, the danger passed, and recovery became possible. Modern stress is often less dramatic but more persistent. Deadlines, debt, traffic, notifications, and an email labeled gentle reminder that is clearly making a threat. So the first secret of ancient health was not a miraculous diet or forgotten medicinal plant. It was a body living inside the kind of environment that had built it. An environment where movement was unavoidable. calories required effort, stress demanded action, and sitting still for 10 hours would have seemed like a very unusual punishment. The strange thing about the prehistoric lifestyle is that nobody invented it as a health program. There was no council of elders announcing that everyone should eat more fiber, expose their eyes to morning sunlight, and complete 10,000 steps before mammoth o'clock. It happened automatically. A foraging group woke when changing temperature, animal sounds, social activity, and daylight made sleeping less practical. Nobody reached for a glowing rectangle to discover that strangers had been arguing overnight. The first information entering the brain came from the actual environment: light, weather, smoke, voices, and perhaps the deeply motivating realization that breakfast had not yet been invented. Then came food. Wild diets differed enormously across regions and seasons, so there was never one universal caveman menu. Arctic hunters, tropical foragers, coastal shellfish collectors, and woodland plant gatherers did not share a prehistoric meal plan. Nature is inconveniently resistant to branding. What they did share was effort and variability. Food had to be located, identified, extracted, processed, carried, and divided. Tubers could require digging and extensive chewing. Nuts needed cracking. Meat arrived unpredictably. Honey was valuable partly because obtaining it sometimes involved climbing a tree while being attacked by the food as security system. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, researchers have documented diets built around foods such as tubers, berries, baobab, honey, and meat, with availability changing across the year. Studies of their gut microbes have even found seasonal shifts associated with this changing ecology. Their internal ecosystem changes with the menu. Ours changes when the coffee shop introduces pumpkin spice. None of this means ancient humans avoided sugar. They loved sweetness because sweetness usually signaled valuable calories. Honey could be consumed enthusiastically whenever it was available. The important difference was not moral discipline. It was friction. Their environment placed physical effort, limited availability, and seasonal interruption between desire and consumption. Our environment places an app between desire and a family-sized dessert. Movement followed the same pattern. Foragers did not normally separate activity into a sacred 60-minute ceremony called working out. They walked while searching, squatted while processing food, climbed when necessary, carried children and supplies, and changed posture throughout the day. Even periods of rest could involve kneeling or squatting, positions that require more muscular activity than collapsing into a padded chair like a tranquilized emperor. Social life also acted as a survival system. Hunting, gathering, childcare, food sharing, storytelling, and protection worked better through cooperation. A bad day for one individual could be softened by the success of others. Sharing was not simply prehistoric kindness. It was insurance without paperwork. This lifestyle produced several conditions now associated with better metabolic and psychological health: regular low-intensity movement, occasional vigorous effort, diverse foods, strong social contact, natural light exposure, and daily tasks with immediate meaning. But we should be careful. Ancient humans did not discover perfect health. They discovered a way of living that matched the body's evolution had given them, while simultaneously being exposed to hunger, injury, infection, parasites, and weather with homicidal intentions. Their wellness program worked because participation was mandatory, and the cancellation policy was terrible. The dead do not fill out medical questionnaires. They leave bones, teeth, chemical traces, and a research problem with terrible customer support. Still, the human skeleton records more than you might expect. Bone constantly remodels itself in response to growth, nutrition, disease, injury, and physical strain. Teeth preserve childhood disruptions in development. Their enamel can trap microscopic wear patterns, while tartar can preserve food particles, proteins, and microbial DNA for thousands of years. Basically, plaque became an archaeological filing cabinet. One of the clearest patterns appears when humans began shifting from mobile foraging to agriculture. This transition happened independently in different regions, at different times, using different crops and animals, so there was no single moment when humanity collectively planted wheat and immediately developed lower back pain. But across many archaeological populations, early farming was associated with troubling changes. Researchers examining prehistoric European skeletons have found evidence that some early farmers were shorter than the hunter-gatherers who preceded them. Ancient DNA helps clarify why this matters. Scientists can estimate a person's genetic potential for height and compare it with the stature their skeleton suggests they actually reached. In several early farming populations, people appear to have grown less than their inherited potential predicted. Their genes ordered the large. Childhood delivered the medium. Reduced growth can reflect inadequate nutrition, repeated infection, or the body diverting energy toward immune defense instead of building bone. Farming could produce more food overall, but relying heavily on a limited number of staple crops did not guarantee that every person received a diverse diet or enough protein and micronutrients. Teeth reveal another piece of the story. Cavities existed long before agriculture, especially among groups eating large amounts of sticky, carbohydrate-rich wild plants. So hunter-gatherer teeth were not universally flawless natural monuments. However, as cereals and other starchy foods became dietary staples, dental caries often became more common. Grains could be ground into particles that clung to teeth, feeding acid-producing oral bacteria. Tooth decay was civilization's early loyalty program. Eat enough bread and eventually receive a free abscess. Skeletons also reveal changes in physical activity. The cross-sectional shape and internal structure of long bones reflect habitual loading. Studies of ancient limbs suggest that mobility generally declined in many populations after the adoption of farming, although the pattern differed by sex, region, and type of labor. Farmers were not lazy. Agricultural work could be brutally demanding, but repetitive digging, grinding, harvesting, and carrying place different stresses on the body than traveling long distances across varied terrain. At settlements such as Çatalhöyük in what is now Turkey, archaeologists have documented the complicated health consequences of dense early village life. Crowded houses, close contact with animals and waste, dietary dependence on cultivated foods, infectious exposure, and intense repetitive labor. This is where the simple story begins to collapse. Ancient foragers were not always healthy. Early farmers were not always sick. Biology responded differently depending on climate, diet, inequality, sanitation, workload, and local disease. But the skeletons do preserve one unsettling lesson. Producing more calories did not automatically produce healthier people. Sometimes humanity increased the food supply and reduced the quality of the human being eating it. This is where prehistoric health becomes less like a clean scientific answer and more like a family argument conducted over several thousand skeletons. Because ancient bones can tell us a lot, but not everything. A skeleton may preserve evidence of arthritis, healed fractures, nutritional stress, tooth decay, infection that reached the bone, or repeated physical labor. What it usually cannot preserve is the headache someone had on a Tuesday, the fever that killed them in 3 days, the anxiety caused by a hostile neighboring group, or the intestinal parasite treating their digestive system like rental property. Soft tissue disappears. Many diseases leave no skeletal signature, and some skeletal damage only appears if a person survives long enough for the body to react. That creates a strange problem known as the osteological paradox. A skeleton showing signs of disease may belong to someone whose immune system successfully kept them alive for years. A skeleton that looks perfectly healthy may belong to someone who died quickly before the disease left any mark. The healthier-looking skeleton may have lost. There is also survivor bias. Adults buried in archaeological sites are, by definition, people who survived infancy, childhood infections, accidents, food shortages, and countless opportunities to become a very small footnote. When we admire their strong bones, we are often studying the winners of a brutal selection process. The children who did not survive are part of the health story too. Infant and child mortality was extremely high in most pre-modern populations. Without vaccines, antibiotics, sterile surgery, safe childbirth, or modern sanitation, minor injuries could become fatal infections. A cut was not always a cut. Sometimes it was the opening chapter of a very short biography. Then there is life expectancy, one of the most frequently misunderstood statistics in human history. A low average life expectancy does not mean everyone died at 30. High infant mortality pulls the average downward. Someone who survived childhood could sometimes live into their 50s, 60s, or beyond. But that does not make prehistoric life secretly equivalent to modern life with worse Wi-Fi. The risk of dying young remained dramatically higher. Researchers also debate how useful modern hunter-gatherers are as models for ancient humans. Groups such as the Hadza, San, and Tsimane offer valuable insights into high-activity lifestyles, food sharing, cardiovascular health, and social organization. But they are modern populations living in modern political, ecological, and economic conditions. They are not prehistoric people preserved in amber. They trade, adapt, face displacement, use manufactured tools, interact with markets, and experience diseases shaped by recent history. Calling them living fossils is not only scientifically inaccurate, It is also a remarkably efficient way to ignore several thousand years of their actual lives. Even famous examples require nuance. The Simony of Bolivia have shown extraordinarily low levels of coronary artery calcification compared with industrialized populations. That does not mean they are free from health problems. They experience substantial infectious disease, parasitic exposure, and inflammatory stress. Their arteries may look younger. Their immune systems are working overtime. So were ancient humans healthier than us? In some measurable ways, often yes. Many were more active, leaner, more physically robust, and less affected by obesity, type 2 diabetes, and some forms of cardiovascular disease. In other ways, absolutely not. They lived with dangers that modern medicine has made so unfamiliar that we can now romanticize them, which is easy to do when the nearest infected tooth is not yours. Once humans settled down, health stopped being only a biological issue. It became political. Agriculture produced something foragers rarely possessed in large quantities: surplus. Grain could be harvested, dried, stored, counted, guarded, taxed, stolen, inherited, and used to convince thousands of people that one man wearing an unusually tall hat had been selected by the universe. Food became power. Permanent settlements also changed the meaning of healing. In small mobile groups, medical knowledge likely existed as practical experience. Which plants soothed pain, which leaves reduced swelling, how to set a broken limb, when to clean a wound, and when to accept that the person touching the mysterious mushroom should have asked more questions. But villages and cities allowed knowledge to accumulate. Specialists emerged. Midwives, herbalists, bone setters, priests, and ritual healers developed techniques that were repeated, taught, and wrapped in stories. Some treatments worked because they contained active compounds. Others worked because rest, attention, expectation, and social support can genuinely change how pain and distress are experienced. And some treatments worked mainly by making the illness feel intimidated. Health rituals became powerful because disease was rarely understood as a purely mechanical failure of the body. Illness could be explained through spirits, ancestors, pollution, broken taboos, divine punishment, sorcery, or the dangerous possibility that your neighbor was being weird on purpose. These explanations may sound irrational now, but ritual served several practical functions. It gave suffering a cause. It gave the community something to do. It established rules around food, sex, childbirth, death, cleanliness, and contact with the sick. Occasionally, those rules reduced exposure to pathogens even when nobody understood microbes. Humans were performing public health before discovering what the public needed protection from. At the same time, civilization created the conditions for entirely new disease systems. Dense populations allowed infections to circulate continuously. Domesticated animals brought humans into closer contact with animal pathogens. Waste accumulated near homes and water sources. Trade routes moved grain, metals, ideas, and microscopic passengers who did not pay customs fees. Inequality made everything worse. Elites could access more varied food, safer housing, lighter labor, and specialized care. Workers and enslaved populations often endured repetitive strain, crowding, nutritional deficiencies, violence, and dangerous occupations. A society could become wealthier while many of the bodies building that wealth became less healthy. This is one of civilization's oldest tricks. The invention of agriculture did not simply make humans sick. It made larger populations possible. It supported cities, writing, engineering, armies, monuments, and eventually scientific medicine. But it also transformed health from a shared struggle against nature into a struggle shaped by class, occupation, geography, and access. People began trading mobility for stability, dietary variety for dependable calories, and immediate freedom for stored resources. It was not an obviously bad deal. It was the kind of deal humanity has always accepted: enormous benefits, hidden fees, and terms nobody reads until several generations later. So were ancient humans healthier than us? Not exactly. They were healthier in ways their environment demanded. Their bones were regularly loaded, their muscles were used, their diets were often less processed, and many chronic metabolic diseases were less common because daily life required movement and rarely provided unlimited calories. But they were also more vulnerable to infections, injuries, childbirth complications, starvation, parasites, and sudden death. Modern humans did not become weaker because medicine failed. We became safer because medicine succeeded. That is the paradox. We now live longer than our ancestors, yet many of us spend those extra years inside bodies receiving fewer of the signals they evolved to expect. We have removed famine, but created constant temptation. We have reduced physical labor, but also removed ordinary movement. We have built climate-controlled rooms, artificial light, food delivery, and furniture so comfortable that standing up now requires motivation. Our ancestors did not possess superior genes. They possessed fewer opportunities to ignore them. This does not mean we should abandon civilization, reject medicine, or begin hunting neighborhood squirrels with handmade spears. The prehistoric world was not a wellness retreat. It was dangerous, exhausting, and completely lacking in customer service. The lesson is simpler. Modern health works best when modern medicine is combined with ancient biological needs. Walking, lifting, sleeping in darkness, eating foods that still resemble food, spending time outside, and maintaining relationships strong enough to survive something more difficult than a delayed group chat reply. We do not need to become ancient humans. We need to remember that ancient humans are still inside us. Every craving for sugar, every restless feeling after sitting too long, every sense of calm around a fire, and every sudden improvement in mood after talking face-to-face with someone is a message from a body built in another world. A world without gyms because movement was unavoidable, without diets because scarcity handled portion control, and without smartwatches reminding people to breathe. They were already outside, probably walking, and almost certainly not checking their step count.